Hey everybody, welcome to a special edition of Live with NORML. I'm JM Pedini, the Development Director for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's Tuesday, March 26, 2024, and today we'll be talking about Women's History Month and the fight for consumer freedom. In particular, how women have contributed to the legalization movement in the United States. We have a few special guests with us today. Hey, before we introduce our guests, take a quick second to hit that like, follow, or subscribe button wherever you're watching so you never miss when NORML goes live, and drop a note in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. Hey, everyone on Instagram, I see so many of you over there. Welcome back, Uncle Chuckles. Hello, Cassidy. Good to see you, friend. Hello, medical cannabis advocates in Maui. Hawaii has a lot going on right now. Be sure to come back and join us on Friday where we're going to talk about all of the legislative action that's happening around the country. Hey there, Leah. Good to see you. Hey, Woodyard. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back, friend. Yeah, I do see that Maui, Hawaii has had some really interesting comments during their legislative debates. All right, let's get into it. I am going to introduce briefly our guests and let them tell you about themselves. First, we have my dear friend, Ellen Komp, who is the Deputy Director of California NORML and has just been an incredible advocate out there for so many years. Hey, Ellen, thanks for joining us today. Are you unmuted? There you go.
Hi, great. Thanks, Jen.
Hey, go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Well, I got involved in the movement in 1991 via the hemp movement, which kind of reinvigorated legalization at that part after the horrible 80s, just say no 80s, I call them. And at the time, there were very few women involved. In fact, I was often the only woman in the room, or there'd be another woman who was somebody's boyfriend or girlfriend or something, right? And I had also been recruited through a boyfriend. And when I broke up with him, I was told, oh, well, you're going to leave the movement now because we've seen it happen before, right? And I was so insulted by that. I had married the movement, not the guy, and 32 years later, I'm still in the movement. And it's been great to watch women get more and more involved as we saw the sea change to legalization, like starting with, I think, Colorado and Washington in 2012. And then in 2016, I really saw a big change where we had the first poll that showed majority support among women for legalization. And previously, the polls had all been tracking women-supported legalization like 10 percentage points less than men, or sometimes 13 or 8, or it was, we were lagging behind. And I was really scratching my head about why this was. And I think part of it that saw the change happen is women taking leadership positions in NORML chapters around the country and also nationally, and women feeling more free to speak about prominent women. We had Murphy Brown, Candace Bergen playing Murphy Brown on TV using medical marijuana in 1997, Melissa Etheridge speaking about her medical marijuana use. And, representation is important. And so I put together, I was doing some presentations about women in cannabis throughout history, because I had been researching for a website I have, veryimportantpotheads.com, where I was looking up biographies of famous people who use cannabis. And of course, I was always particularly interested when it was a woman. So I just wanted women to understand, because yes, my Twitter feed was like 85% men at the time. And, there were just fewer and fewer women getting the message or feeling like they could speak out. And so I put out this book, Token Women, a 4,000-year history of women in marijuana, starting with the ancient goddesses up to, Miley Cyrus, who have spoken out in favor of medical marijuana, or marijuana in general, looking for the unusual person like Louisa May Alcott or Maya Angelou or something. And boy, people learning something like that really opens their eyes, helps end the prejudices that they have about what a pot smoker looks like or what they contribute to society or something. And the fact that it was women, I think helped women connect with that. And, women would come up to me after these presentations and thank me. Oh, I feel a part of something now and that kind of thing. And so it's been great to be involved at that level and, continuing to fight for women's rights, parental rights, all kinds of things, in California, employment rights we've been fighting for. And it's great to have the other women on the program today. I want to hear from Beverly and Nikki, because they're making history.
Sure. Look, Ellen, I have a copy of your book here as well for everyone who's interested in seeing that. Mm-hmm. Is it available online?
Yeah, at California NORML, canormal.org. We have it in our bookstore.
Perfect. Thanks so much for telling our friends a little bit about yourself. Ellen, I think we are gonna hear from NORML Board of Directors member Nikki Freed. Let's add Nikki to the show. Hey, Nikki.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Hey, friends, if you have questions for any of our guests today, go ahead and drop those in the comments and I'll be sure to get to those. But first, let's go ahead and hear from Nikki. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, Nikki?
Yeah, well, first of all, here in Florida. So kind of my cannabis track is very interesting. Started kind of advocacy a little bit when I was even in college. I went to the University of Florida where I was student body president my last year, so 2002, 2003, while getting my JD. And actually, it was the first time that a NORML chapter was coming onto the University of Florida campus. And I remember the controversy of having NORML on campus and whether student government can fund it. And of course, we let them on, and of course, we gave them money. And so that kind of started the trend. And when I ran for student body president, we had this like underground movement that was happening on campus. My party name was called the Ignite Party. And so some of the Greek houses did haul these t-shirts that's in the back of it, Spark It Up. So again, kind of been in this movement for quite some time. And then I became a government consultant here in Florida after we passed the low THC back in 2015, and then was involved with the expansion of access for patients throughout the state as we continue to move through the expansion for patients' rights, right to try. And in 2018 was really kind of the moment where I was sitting at a conference in Miami. And a lot of people were kind of discussing what was happening in the governor's race here in 2018 in the state of Florida. Also, that was right after AG Sessions had rescinded the Komp memorandum. For all those who remember, that was the protections for medical companies across the country, as well as for doctors and patients, as long as they were following the state regulatory schemes. I went up to Washington, D.C., was trying to figure out what's next from the federal perspective, either from the Attorney General's perspective or even from banking. And so I'm at this conference. Everybody's all ginned up about what is going on in the cannabis space in the state and across the country. And at that moment, we were having lots of meals that said, why do we keep getting our butts kicked in Washington, D.C. when there were at that time 34 states that had either full legalization or medical programs? And we all came to the conclusion it was because that there was not at that time a lot of statewide elected members of Congress who actually came from the industry. And so in 2018, I was brushing my teeth and after that conference and turned to my partner and said, I'm going to run for governor. And you should see his eyes light up. Oh no, we're in trouble here. She's going to actually do this. Instead, I ran for Commissioner of Agriculture. In which Commissioner of Agriculture here in the state of Florida is a member of the cabinet, one of 4 constitutional officers who oversees agriculture, but also the consumer part of the state of Florida. And I ran on 3 W's in my campaign in 2018: weed, water, and weapons. And I'm even wearing one of my shirts. Nikki Fried will legalize weed. And so I became the 12th Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Florida when I won by 6,753 votes. The only statewide elected Democrat that made it across the finish line in 2018. And I spent the 4 years in my office. And while medical cannabis is not regulated by Department of Agriculture, it is by the Department of Health underneath the governor's office. We really were a thorn in the governor's side on everything, but even more so on this. We created a green ribbon report to really bring in doctors and patients and advocates, figuring out what now at this point, the medical program had been in place for about 4 years, what changes needed to be made, making recommendations for enhanced expansion. Also, one of my first things that I pushed for in 2019 was legalization of hemp here in the state of Florida, was able to pass that through on the notion that not everybody can be a cannabis patient. In our medical registry, we knew a lot of our minorities were not able to get access. Prices were high, all the things that you all know about in medical programs that always don't help the consumer. So we legalized hemp in the state, and I had a very open market opportunity for people to get into this space. And lo and behold, the great chunk of the industry came to the state of Florida. And in the 3 years that I was commissioner, we created a $19 billion hemp industry, 189,000 jobs. We had $1.3 billion worth of salaries, a pretty robust open market here in the state of Florida. And after I ran for governor, I lost in my primary, but the fight continued and continues. And so now I'm actually chair of the Florida Democratic Party. And on the same day that I was elected as chair of the Florida Democratic Party, I was also selected to be a board member for NORML. So now I get to continue taking this advocacy, not just for the state of Florida, but across the entire country until we get to full legalization for the nation.
Oh, thanks so much, Nikki. I'm so glad that you joined the NORML Board of Directors. It's really fantastic to have your voice there as well.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us today. Hey, friends, if you have questions for Ellen or Nikki, be sure to drop those in the comments. We are going to go ahead and introduce our third and final guest for this afternoon's live, and then we'll take your questions. And maybe I'll have some questions for them as well. Friends, if you joined us for our Black History Month episode, then you will remember that we spoke with our next guest then, Professor Beverly Moran. Thank you for coming back and joining us again. Beverly is also a member of the NORML Board of Directors, and I am going to ask you to tell our friends a little bit about yourself.
I've been on the board now for 6 years. I came to the board from very active participation in my local chapter, which was Tennessee NORML. Tennessee, as you may know, is one of the 13 states that has absolutely no access to marijuana. Of course, there's access to cannabis through hemp. And so in Tennessee, we've seen a lot of Delta 8, and we've seen a lot of ways around legalization, which has made us wonder about what are the best next steps. 3 years ago, I relocated from Tennessee to Massachusetts, which is a fully legal state. Although I continue, and part of the reason why I do continue with my Tennessee chapter is because I feel the need is so much greater there. But it's also given me a chance to compare prohibition and what we would say is legalization, and to interrogate some of the ways that even in very legal states, we don't have full legalization, and that often affects women, minorities, and poor people more than, or poor and working class people more than other people within the community. So there are people who would tell you that Massachusetts is fully free. You can go, you can find a dispensary easily. You can purchase a wide variety of products. But if you look a little bit under the surface, there are problems here that still need to be resolved. And that makes NORML a very exciting place, because NORML's whole emphasis is on the consumer. And that's really a space that gets ignored in a lot of the legalization discussions and movements. There's such an emphasis on legalization that we don't necessarily see the cannabis space through the consumer's eyes. And that's something that I'm very interested in. So I'm honored to be on the board and to be able to participate in that. I can't hear you.
Thanks so much for joining.
Okay.
That was
Thank
my
you.
fault. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Right.
Beverly, I wanted to ask you a question first. You were, as we mentioned, a guest on our episode for Black History Month, where we discussed the fight for consumer equity. Do you see a relationship between the topics we talked about in Black History Month and what we're talking about today, Women's History Month and cannabis legalization?
Yeah, I do. First of all, Black History Month and Women's History Month both respond to a reality that we all live in, which is that the history that we learn from our schools, from our social media, or other media, from our parents, from our friends, is generally history that is through a white male lens. And so it's not a full history, a rich history, it's a slice of history that needs to be expanded. And that really is not just true in general, but it's also true specifically in the cannabis space. And it goes back to part of what I was talking about in terms of what does legalization mean? So I think what ties these two together in a very real way is that minorities, women, and children occupy like the bottom quintile of income in the United States. There are more than 2/3 of the people in the bottom 20% of income are either women, children, or minorities. And in terms of the cannabis space and legalization, for many of these people, there really isn't legalization because they don't have access to dispensaries. Getting licensing is expensive. They don't have good access to good information about what might help them or what they might have to avoid or whatever. And they don't have things that middle class and upper class people just assume in terms of cannabis consumption, which is a place where you can consume. Because if you're a renter, in every state where it's legal, your landlord can still evict you for causing, a public nuisance, and in employment. And it's true that many people have to work, who have high incomes, but it's much less likely that your employment is going to be at risk or that you're going to be subject to drug testing the higher up you get on the salary scale. Excuse me. Sorry, I have a bit of bronchitis. And for women, there's the extra problem of the whole question of children, because once you bring children into the mix, then that seems to allow the state to interfere heavily in your life, even if you are consuming legally. And Ellen was just fantastic. She just sent out an email about 2 hours ago on just this issue and how it affects women and children in California, which I just thought was brilliant, and I was hoping she would share.
Yeah, Ellen, would you like to expand on that and maybe talk about what are some of the ongoing issues for women cannabis consumers?
Yeah, I still get calls, of mothers or parents having their parental rights interfered with, and the poor child is sometimes taken away to elsewhere. And that's a call I drop everything for now. I guess can't think of anything worse. And we did pass, when we passed Proposition 64 in 2016, the voters passed it here. It did have a clause saying that if a parent had a medical marijuana recommendation, they were not to be discriminated against as far as parental rights goes. And we were also able to pass a law a couple years ago that required Child Protective Services, CPS, to put out something saying that, workers were to treat marijuana use the same as alcohol or legal drugs. Both of those, however, like we often know, you can pass a law, but implementation is key. And implementation of both of those has been spotty. Lawyers aren't always even aware of what the parental rights are. And it can vary county by county and judge by judge, whether or not that is upheld. And so it's, it continues, the stigma continues. The other thing that's happening is women and newborns are often drug tested when they give birth, mostly at public hospitals, more so than private hospitals. So this is another instance of the racism and the classism of the drug war, right? Where I've looked at books and studies where, a far larger percentage of Black parents are having their parental rights, interfered with. And then, again, think about the children, what the result is down the road for a child who's been removed from someone's home. So I've often thought this is one reason women were felt less free to speak out about legalization or use cannabis. And I think that may be true. Whereas, if you look online, that the wine mother is like a thing, like mommy needs her wine, it's like a cult or something, so we're still having more work to do to sort of bring it impaired, normalize it, get our rights that are on par with alcohol and other things, using it responsibly, of course, being a responsible parent, which, most people who use cannabis are. In fact, some people will write it helps them relate to their kids better. Like maybe they'll smoke, they'll keep one parent straight in case he's got to go to the hospital or something. But, they sit and I'm just an aunt, boy, when I can interact with a child, when I'm a little bit stoned, I'm right on their level, I saw one father write something about, I used to come home from work and just, be grumpy and everything. And now, I'm like, well, what does this dinosaur do, with my kid for hours, So, there's so many beautiful things about pot and how it enables us to interact with others that, we're still trying to get like consumption lounges in most places in California. We have legalization where you can go into a place that looks like a bank or something, buy your pot, go home. If your landlord lets you smoke it, you can smoke it there, right? You can't smoke it with anybody else. Go to a party, go hear some music. There are some consumption lounges that have opened up in San Francisco and West Hollywood and Palm Springs, all gay communities, interestingly. But in Oakland and Berkeley, no, we just had a legal seminar. We tried to find a place for an after party venue. Couldn't find one in either Oakland or Berkeley, where, we've had legalization here for a long time. So the stigmas continue, and you legalize it and then you open it up to regulation. and taxation and all kinds of things that can sort of kill it. And then everyone's like, oh, well, legalization is such a big failure, you know, and it's like, well, yeah, the way that we did it, it's problematic, you know. So there's still a lot of work to be done, even more so because it's become more complicated. We've got another 40 bills we're tracking this year in California. Last year it was 60. You know, there's one bill, we passed an employment rights law a couple years ago, and that it probably affects people of color and things more because it's often like blue collar jobs, not to be stereotypical about it, but I do hear from people and I see who's out there. And there's a new law proposed this year that would strip law enforcement officers and everybody who works in law enforcement, including animal control officers, you know, so the dog catcher can't smoke pot off the job. And we specifically targeted our bill or wrote it so that it was all about off the job use, where you can't just use urine testing anymore because that can pick up use days or weeks before. You could test for live THC if, you know, impairment was suspected or something. Yes. And so we're still really shaking out. Again, implementation is so key, how the employers are really going to follow that law. And every day I hear from, you know, more questions about it. How are we going to do it, and how are we going to do it fairly? Because impairment is really the problem, not whether or not you smoked it the night before or days before. Are you impaired on the job? And there's, as we know, there's no impairment test for marijuana, but there are impairment tests in general, performance tests that you can do instead of just this emphasis on chemical testing. It's like taking a loyalty oath or McCarthyism or something, you know. And kids today, they haven't grown up where they didn't have to pee in a cup to join the chess club or the tennis club or something like that, you know. I mean, we just accepted it. Like, yeah, this is because people think it somehow contributes to workplace safety, which the studies show it does not, you know.
Absolutely.
Paul Armentano at NORML has a page up about that on the fact sheets at NORML.
Yeah, we sure do. Yeah. You know, Nikki, I saw you shaking your head yes to a lot of things that Ellen was talking about. I am sure you have some thoughts as well, not only about ongoing issues for women cannabis consumers, but also how is cannabis legalization on the whole impacting women?
Yeah, it was interesting. So for those who don't know, one of the last things that I did in 2022 on April 20th, filed a federal lawsuit for the rights of our consumers to also be able to purchase a firearm. I did it under my official capacity as Commissioner of Agriculture because I oversaw the concealed weapons permit. And so the group at one, we had 3 classes of individuals. One was myself in my official capacity. And because as most of you know, that it's the ATF national form that asks the specific question, whether or not you are you under the influence of or, you know, addicted to a controlled substance. And as we all know, federally, cannabis is still considered a controlled substance. So felt that how am I supposed to be choosing between my constitutional rights, between a right to bear arms and a right in the Florida Constitution to be able to have a medical cannabis card. And that's actually me at the front of this holding up my, I'm sorry, I think which one, my cannabis card and my concealed weapons permit. So I had both, and that was an issue of contention here in Florida. And I was just very out. I've got my medical marijuana card and my concealed weapons permit, but I wasn't able to purchase a firearm. And so one of those arguments was, as a single female, I do have a partner, but you know, as a single female who travels a lot around the state, to be able to protect myself. And so not only, again, I sued on behalf of my at the Department of Agriculture, and the 2 classes, one were veterans. Again, veterans who have possession of firearms that wanted access to cannabis to make sure that they have the same rights that the rest of us have. And those actually females that were small business owners who work late nights, want that extra protection to purchase a firearm. And so saw even in those contexts where women were coming and wanting to be able to have access to cannabis and also find ways to still protect themselves, that was also an issue. But we find this, during my time as commissioner, multiple times over the course of those years, we had teachers that were fired because of their use of cannabis, even though there is no drug testing to be a teacher in the state of Florida. But I guess to get additional certification, there was, and people have tested positive, or people just had knowledge that these individuals were on the medical marijuana registry. So we saw, even when it came to our teachers, which we all know a very high percentage of our teachers are women, And so we really have seen just kind of how a lot of men have other options and other opportunities out there and other ways to defend and protect themselves. Saw a lot of women who were using this as other alternatives, that were losing their jobs and losing their certificates in their professions. And even just talking to, yes, I too am have no biological children of my own. And so I have a niece and a nephew, and my sister's also involved in the cannabis space. So we have a lot of conversations about this and about a lot of the new soccer mom doesn't want to come at home and drink wine. They want to come home and have a gummy. Life is hard out there. And when you're talking about women who are juggling everything, juggling the household, juggling work, for mothers that have full-time jobs and still responsible for the household at the end of the day and everything else that goes with it, are wanting to not have wine at the end of the day, but want to have, whether it is an edible or be able to take a vape pen. And there's still this stigma that it's okay for you to come home and have a bottle of wine, but it's not okay for you to come home and have a couple of hits off of your vape pen, or to take a 5 or 10 milligram edible at the end of the night. And so we still see a lot of that, and women that are wanting to find that balance in their life, even taking CBD in the beginning part of the day. And I know that's something that my sister and I do, in the mornings, have CBD in the morning. And if you don't understand, there is still the stigma of, oh my God, you're taking drugs in front of your children. And even as a past public defender, which I was for 3.5 years, seeing a lot of the child custody issues and a lot of parents asking me the questions, I'm a cannabis user, am I going to lose my kids if in fact I am drug tested, or it is dealing with custody disputes? We don't ask the same questions for a lot of the men. It still seems that the women are carrying this burden of justifying their usage of cannabis in their everyday lives, and we have to continue to normalize and have these conversations as we go through it.
Thank you so much for that. That's a great segue into the final question that I am going to have for each of you. And Bev, we'll start with you. Certainly, NORML provides a lot of resources for advocacy and a number of ways to get involved. Bev, how do you recommend women who are interested in participating in cannabis law reform? What suggestions do you have for them, and recommendations on steps they could take?
You're on mute.
And I was being so brilliant too. The first thing that I would recommend is that everybody get the NORML newsletter, because you'll see information about what's going on in your state. You'll see research that will be of interest to you, and it gives you a portal into, by being on the list for the newsletter. Sorry, you're also on the list to get action alerts. And these action alerts let you know what's going on in your state and allow you to send letters to your elected representatives just basically with 2 clicks or 3 clicks. So that would be the first way of getting involved, because you can do that at home. You don't, you're obviously not going to be anonymous so that your name is going to be on a letter, but it's not the same as like going to the state house or talking at a PTA meeting or something like that. To the extent that you have a NORML chapter in your state, I think that's a good way of starting to connect to other people and seeing if there are steps that you can take in your community. I mean, one of the things that, and obviously it's a big difference whether you're in a prohibition state or a medical marijuana state or an adult use state. But especially if we're talking about Women's History Month and the point that we were all making that women and children are often in, close conversation. I mean, we are generally the first teachers for children. That educating oneself and educating those around you is an important first step. I mean, Ellen was talking about how most of the consumption lounges that she was finding are in gay communities. And I think that that's not just by chance. I think that, especially in prohibition states, the status of being LGBTQTI, I'm sure I missed something in there, I'm sorry, and the status of being a cannabis consumer are somewhat analogous. I mean, you're in a situation where you need to have contact with people, right, in order to do what you want to do. And this contact with people can get you arrested, right? And that actually creates community. And that's one of the things that NORML has traditionally done from the 1970s till now, is create safe spaces where people who have an interest in cannabis consumption can find out where they can find some cannabis, find out what's safe or not safe in their state, and meet like-minded people. And that is more than just a selfish thing. It's extremely important because it's those communities that change laws. I mean, we talk about different organizations coming in and lobbying legislators or running campaigns, but you can't get politicians to move on something as controversial as either gay rights or cannabis consumption without the grassroots changing first. So any way that you can change the grassroots, starting with yourself, I think is an important step towards liberating the entire country.
Thanks so much, Beverly. Appreciate those thoughts. Ellen, got the same question for you as well, friend.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, taking off from that, CalNormal does a lobby day every year in our state capital, Sacramento. And that's a great place. So a citizen lobbyist day. So we have a morning session where we talk about all the different bills that we're going to be lobbying on. We have fact sheets. We make appointments for them with their legislators and give them some tips about, be concise, follow up, blah, blah, blah. And so it really, we've trained, a cadre of citizens now, so that when a bill comes up, we can send someone to, a local district office or something, or their state office, and, develop a relationship with their legislators and their staff. And I'll tell you, we really saw a sea change last year. I'm looking at some of the comments that, there's still fear of coming forward, and I understand that, especially in some states. But in California, finally, it's California's not as liberal everywhere as you would think. There's still some pretty conservative parts of it. And, instead of kind of bucking the trend this year, people were so accepting of us. I think it's partly generational. I think, again, not to be stereotypical, but with the younger people as staffers, they're hipper. They don't buy the old, reefer madness rhetoric anymore. They have personal experience with it that, teaches them otherwise oftentimes. And it was really, we felt so much more welcomed. Several lawmakers came to our after party, and as did staff. And so, you just got to keep chipping away at it and keep showing your face and just being that, representative, that ambassador for the positive side of it. And as much as you can, again, I don't have children and things, so maybe I would feel more, afraid to do so if I did. But as much as you can, if you can write a letter, or we also have a weekly newsletter, California NORML, and or just talk to your friends and neighbors about it, because a lot of, my project about, the famous women and stuff, what seems to really open people's eyes and change their mind is if someone they admire, either someone they know or someone, famous, admits to using it and isn't, doesn't have 3 heads and isn't, a terrible, worthless person, they have to address that reality. And so, yeah, those are some things that women and everyone can do.
Well, thanks so much, Ellen, and thank you for your advocacy in California and with NORML over these many, many years. Nikki will be our final question answerer here this afternoon. What do you think? What are some ways you would suggest women get involved?
Well, first of all, what I think is interesting, so I had the opportunity to be at the White House last Monday, where the president announced over $200 million that was going to be allocated for women, for research in women's healthcare. Which some things I didn't even know about the amount of research that has been done for medicines, even for estrogen and whatnot. And all of the people that they've tested on are men. So all the medications that we have been taking and the things that we have are based on research from men. And so it's really interesting to see that even when it comes to the healthcare space, that the research on women's bodies and what impacts us, how many times have all of us gone to the doctor's office and they say it's in your head or it's stress related, when the reality is that there's other things going on, but we just haven't done the research. So one is making sure that you are understanding where in the medical side things are. It comes as research as far as where women's healthcare is at, but also the best part of lobbying or government relations or just, changing the perception of what goes on in this space is storytelling. We all have those stories. We all have the people that we have been interacting with that this has changed their lives, that people are able to walk because they've been able to use THC and CBD products, or just have more stability in their lives and more balance. And I always tell this story. When, y'all heard it earlier that I was elected as commissioner in 2018, I had a 2-week recount during that period of time. Out of the 8.2 million Floridians, again, I won out 6,753 votes, a 2-week recount, both hand recount and machine recount. Well, on the Thursday where we thought elections were over, my sister, again, she's in the cannabis space as well, called me up. I had not slept now for almost 48 hours, refreshing every supervisor of elections websites. And my sister calls me and goes, I know this is not going to be an ideal conversation, but we all thought the elections were going to end on Tuesday. But mom has been diagnosed with stage 4 uterine cancer, and she has to have emergency surgery on Monday. And so that was a shock to somebody who at that point was at capacity, could not emotionally handle all of that. But as my mom is going through chemo treatment and going through her recovery phases, I get this just freak out phone call from my mom. Nick, I can't do this anymore. The cancer, the chemo is just taking everything out of me. I don't know if I can go through any more treatments. And I said, Mom, that's not an option. You've got 2 daughters. You've got 2 grandchildren. We need you to fight. And so because my sister and I are so knowledgeable about the industry, was able to get my mom onto the registry pretty quickly, get her into there. And again, my father has been smoking for 40 years. He kept asking me, I don't understand, Nick. He's like, you're writing these laws here in Florida. Why can't we grandfather in cannabis users for 30 plus years? But my mom was not. And so we had to go through and educate my mom on the type of products to make sure you have the high THC products after the chemo and take high dosages of CBD in between. And because of that, my mom was able to get through her chemo treatments and was able to put up that fight that she needed. And thank God she has now been 2 years cancer-free. But without cannabis, I don't know if my mom would be here today. And I think that for all of us to tell those emotional stories, we all have them. We all have them. And in order to change the laws, and in order to change the perception out there, we got to tell these real stories. And that is always my greatest advice, not even just on cannabis, but anything. It's about storytelling. It's telling the stories of the veterans that come home from war and are given these prescription drugs and alcohol and all this stuff. Whereas you put them on cannabis, they have a better opportunity to get through PTSD. And again, we all have these stories. And so my greatest advice is continue storytelling. That's what got us here today. That is what is going to continue this movement, and making sure, because again, it's about the consumers, how these products are impacting their lives, the barriers that are put in front of us, and making sure that we're always thinking first and foremost of how do we make people's lives better. That is how we all started here. We all started in how to make sure that the movement is moving forward so we can make sure that people are not having opioid overdoses. We know that any state that has any type of medical or full legalization program, you're seeing 20 to 30% decreases in opioid overdoses. These are because consumers would rather that natural product than that of the pharmaceutical grade, which is why it's been so hard for us to get to legalization, because the pharmaceuticals continue to fight us. But again, it's all about storytelling, and it's making sure that it's coming from the heart, because I think that's why all of us are continuing in this movement for so many years and so many decades, because it's something that we believe in.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much for that, Nikki. I think that all of us could probably agree on this. It seems like working in cannabis, people love to ask you why, but why do you do this job? Why are you here? And I don't think anyone ever asked me that, at least not as much prior to entering this space. But what you said was so true, Nikki. It is storytelling. My first career was at Disney, and that is storytelling all day long. And I think that, on its surface, people may kind of turn their head and say, well, how is Disney entertainment the same as cannabis lobbying? And it's literally the same, because it is storytelling. And it's just a little more difficult here on this side of the spectrum to find a way to make people care deeply about an issue that requires a huge policy change, and one that they might not be thinking about on a regular basis. Certainly we all are, because we are all here, not just today, but every day doing this work. Look at how many viewers we have here with us right now on a Tuesday afternoon to talk about cannabis law reform, and they care deeply about it as well. And so I'm so thankful to each of you for joining us this afternoon and sharing with our viewers how they can get involved or be even more involved with NORML. Friends, join me in thanking all of our guests for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much. We do Live with NORML almost every week, and I'd love to see you back here on Friday. We'll be talking about all of the cannabis science and policy news happening around the country, Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, almost every week. So hit that like, follow, or subscribe button wherever you're watching, so you never miss when NORML goes live. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for joining us. This has been a blast, and I look forward to talking with you all again on Friday. Thanks so much, and I'll see you back here next time. Bye-bye.